Charter Committee will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Barker? Here. Mr. Eckel? Here. Mr. Esposito? Here. Mr. Howland? Here. Chairman Yolovich?
Here. Everybody sit. Is there anyone signed up for the public forum?
We have two public forum speakers. When I call your name, please come forward to the podium. You'll have 2 minutes and only 2 minutes in which to address the committee. Please conclude when the buzzer sounds. First, we'll have Mac McGonigal, followed by Bob Bowman.
Thanks for listening to me. I'll start out with that. My name is Mac McGonigal. I live in Brighton. And my subject, which I put on a letter here, you'll get a copy of later, is I think we need to act like the stewards that you're supposed to be when there's a suggestion on board to possibly save $500,000 with the legislator cost by reducing the legislators. There's been a lot of nonsense that goes on in this county. First, although another thing I would like to say is I'm not registered in either party. I'm not with any organization. But I think the taxpayers in Monroe County are a little sick of the nonsense, the political nonsense that goes on. As soon as I read something in the Brighton-Pittsford Post, Mr. Cottrell there immediately jumps to the whole political spin, and he immediately puts that on this issue. I mean, I would rather have an 8-7 split with the same nonsense we have at 29. At least we'd save $500,000 by doing that, okay? What's the point in having 29, okay? There's no benefit to the taxpayer. The other thing I would mention is, this is a choice. A lot of people talk about some of this stuff as if it's mandated. You look on the budget and the county legislator is mandated. Well, if it was really mandated, we wouldn't even be having this discussion, right? So there's a choice. We made a choice some time ago to put 29 in. You have it listed as a mandated, which is a whole other subject sort of, but I address it in the note here. But, you lied to the Monroe County taxpayers. You got all this mandated stuff, MCC, the sales tax that goes to the school districts. None of that is mandated. But you have that kind of stuff listed mandated, and you try to fool the taxpayers into thinking that 19% is the only percent in locally that we have some control over, which is the most irritating line that Maggie Brooks could ever say. I hate hearing it whenever she says that. But I had more content, but I guess I got to abide by my time.
Thank you.
Is Bob Bowman here?
Hi. I'm a professor of electrical engineering at RIT, which makes me completely unqualified to talk before this body. In fact, the only thing that really makes me qualified to be here is that I'm a taxpayer. Now, every once in a while, a young man or a young woman who is really not burdened down by being jaded with the process comes along with a good idea. I'm a staunch Republican. It just so happens that this young fellow is a Democrat. It just goes to show you that good ideas, have no partisanship. And every once in a while, we need to back these things that come along. Now, I realize this is a very unusual proposition, sacrificing perhaps your own position for the betterment of the taxpayers of Monroe County. But I suggest to you, after looking at 5 or 6 other counties that are just as big, if not much bigger than us, we're twice as staffed as they are. And I don't sense that we're doing quite twice as good a job. So I ask you, if you want to be responsible legislatures, cut our ranks. We need it. It's the only way that this system works, because you're the only shepherd that protects the taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. You have the January 25th, 2010 minutes before you. They will stand approved unless The clerk is notified by the end of the day. Madam Clerk, new business.
Referral 10-74, amending section C2-12 of the Monroe County Charter to reduce the number of county legislature districts.
Moved by Legislator Esposito, seconded by Legislator Eckel. Is there any discussion? Legislator Esposito.
Opportunity to address this motion. If I could, I'd like to take the liberty of going through a few of, I believe, the benefits of this proposed legislation, address some of the criticisms that I've heard, and then be happy to take questions from my colleagues or anyone interested in the bill. Almost exactly 1 month ago, I announced the introduction of this proposal to give this committee extra time to consider the possibility of reducing our ranks from the current 29 legislators to 15. I personally believe this could create a more effective, engaged, and empowered body that is comparable to other large counties in New York State who are also considering or have reduced their ranks. I believe this can produce a significant savings on an ongoing basis to the county in excess of $500,000 every year. And importantly, this proposal would require a referendum vote of all county voters in this coming November's general election, giving the people the opportunity to decide the size government that they want to have. I know that many people have questioned the cost savings and whether or not they're substantial enough to warrant a proposal as controversial as this, I might say. And I believe right now, going into this year, taxpayers have made it very clear that they want to see real spending cuts to government whenever possible. I think it's imperative for us as county legislators to relook at the entire budget, just the same as every business and household has been forced to do and in many cases cut back over the last year or so during these difficult economic times. Our own county is facing a structural budget deficit that continues to increase. It is now over $109 million over the next 2 years. This proposal is an important first step to directly change course to reduce our structural budget deficit in excess of $1 million off of that $109 million and show that this body and the members here are willing to make the sacrifice that we're going to need to ask of others within this government and within this community to get our fiscal crisis resolved. Ironically, there's been a lot of talk about what we can and can't cut in our county budget because of mandates, as alluded to by our previous public speaker. This cut, ironically, as I said, is a cut to a mandated expense. All $500,000 are supposedly outside of the control of this body and this county in our budget because we are required by state law to have a legislative body. But there's no requirement to have 29 legislators and there's no requirement to spend in excess of $2 million on that legislature. I believe very firmly that the financial future of this county is more important than our individual elected offices or personal ambition. Many of you have raised questions, legitimate ones at that, about the size of county districts and how responsive and accessible we can be as legislators. I believe this is a very legitimate issue. I would simply point out that 29 districts is simply an arbitrary vestige of the old Board of Supervisors when we transition to a county legislature. I believe it's very manageable to represent a district of 50,000 people as opposed to 25. For example, the town of Irondequoit that I represent, instead of having effectively 2 legislators, would be reduced to 1. I don't think that's overly burdensome. And when you look at other counties across the state, including the top 4 most populous counties outside of New York City, they average 17 legislators and represent 67,000 residents. So our representation would still be below those if you believe it's too onerous. And I think it's also important to note that in 2010, as we look again at everything that our county government does, it's much easier than ever to communicate and to hear from constituents, given all of the electronic mediums and accessible nature that people have of contacting us and reaching us in this new technical age. I've also heard concerns about the political balance of power of the county legislature as it relates to redistricting. I can assure you that this is not what this proposal is about. Of course, there's political ramifications, but this does not change the redistricting process, which is still controlled by the party in power, which happens to be the Republican Party. It is raised at this time simply because the timing is important. We have a unique opportunity, whereas at the end of next year, all 29 legislative districts, their terms expire. combine that with the opportunity to redistrict, which will occur whether or not we have 29 or 15 districts, this is the appropriate time to put forth this proposal so that the public can consider its ramifications before redistricting occurs and before you would have to eliminate any county seats in the middle of any terms due to the fact that they all end next year. For that reason, I've structured this proposal so that there will be a public hearing after this committee. It is my sincere hope that this committee will allow that process to take its course so that public can come in here, debate the merits and the negatives of this proposal to determine the size of their county government and the type of representation they want to have. So for that reason, I would encourage you to vote yes, just to allow this process to continue and to take a look and show that there are constituents that we're willing to sacrifice by reorganizing our own ranks, and then we can get on with the difficult process of addressing the other aspects of our county budget to overcome our fiscal crisis. I'd be happy to take questions on the proposal from any of my colleagues on the committee.
Is there any other comment? I'm sorry, Legislator Eckel, did you?
You have questions? No, I don't have questions.
Legislator Eckel?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As my esteemed colleague, Mr. Esposito, good friend Vinny, has said,
My cousin.
this is not about political power. This is about money. This is about our jobs. This is about what we do. We as legislators, our top priority is to govern and overlook the budget of the County of Monroe. If we can save $10, $20, $500, $500,000, we ought to look very seriously at this. $500,000 every year for the next ad infinitum years. May the county live forever. I'm willing to take on twice as many constituents. I'm willing to lose my job. The county is what matters here. The county budget is what matters here. $500,000 is what matters here. We need to save this money. We need any way we can to find savings throughout the budget. As my colleague has said, if we can't look at our own house first, how can we ask other houses to trim their own budgets? How can we ask any other services to be cut if we can't even look at ourselves? We talk a lot about bloated government and reducing government. We've heard the term reducing government many, many times. Well, here's your chance to reduce government from the very top right on down. We have double the number of elected legislators in all our neighboring counties. Erie, 10 more than Onondaga, 12 more than Westchester. Do we really need 29 seats in here? I think not. I'm looking at this chamber and seeing half the seats gone. And thinking, well, if we have to do it, we have to do it. Because this is what we need to do. This is what we should do. And this is what we're asking to do. Please take a chance and consider the question, should we, 5 legislators, decide what we're asking all the citizens of the county to do? And that's have a referendum. Let them choose and tell us. Yes, supposedly they told us last election, but did they know that we could cut $500,000 from our budget? Let's give the voters a choice. Let's give them the chance to say, yes, we want to cut, or no, we want our government to stay as it is. Thank you.
Is there any other further discussion? Legislator Howland?
Mr. Chairman, The referral placed before us today by our Democratic colleagues states that we can reduce the cost of government by reducing the number of elected legislators from 29 to 15. They have made the assumption that fewer legislators automatically results in lower costs. They want us to believe that their examples of Erie, Onondaga, Westchester, Suffolk, and Nassau counties have more cost-effective governments than Monroe County because they are able to govern with fewer legislators. But is this true? Using the Democrats' own list of counties, my research has found that fewer legislators lead to higher, not lower costs. I found the average legislative salary for the 5 counties listed in their referral was $49,591. This is 2 3/4 times greater than the $18,000 salary earned by Monroe County representatives. I found the average legislative budget for the 5 counties, which are supposed to be doing a better job than us, is $5,677,000. Again, this is 2 3/4 times more costly than the $2,055,000 spent by Monroe County to do the same work. It appears to me that what happens in other counties once the number of legislators is reduced is that their pay goes up to compensate them for additional work, and more staff is hired to assist the legislators in accomplishing that work. For example, according to the New York Times, each legislator in Suffolk County has a staff of 3 assigned to them. I share a staff of 5 with 16 other Republican legislators, which gives me the full-time staff equivalent of 0.31 people. Therefore, I have to ask, through you, Mr. Chairman, where are these counties saving money by having fewer legislators?
Thank you, Mr. Howland. Is there any other discussion?
I'm sorry, was that a question to me?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Legislator Esposito.
I'd like to make it very clear. This proposal does not change in any way, shape, or form the level of compensation for Monroe County legislators. It does not. That's exactly where the savings come from. The $500,000 is simply a calculation of the amount of salary and benefits and resources used by the average county legislator in this county. I understand the comparisons that you made to the other counties with regards to the size of their budgets. That's not what this is about. This is about this proper size of representation. That's why I use those other counties as examples. No one is saying that this county's legislative budget is out of control. No one is saying this county's legislative budget is the cause of our structural budget deficit. However, what we are saying is if we're going to look at every single item in the budget, there is potential waste, I believe, in the size of the county legislature. It's not that we've spent too much or going on some sort of spending spree, but it's a simple fact that we don't need 29 of us to do the work that we do. And if we cut those ranks, there will be considerable savings on an ongoing basis to the county budget and county taxpayers. So that's what this is about. It's not about a proposal to underhandedly raise the salaries of county legislators or to underhandedly take control of the county legislature politically.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, don't you find it at least interesting that every county that was suggested in your referral actually has to pay more money for their legislators and their staff? Perhaps not today it wouldn't be changing, and perhaps today we would be saving money, but every one of these counties that have cut the number of legislators they have are now paying 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much as we are to run our county legislature.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, I do. I find it very interesting. And in some places, I find it egregious how much legislators make. I can only assume they're not part-time like they are here. But it doesn't change the fact that that's not what we're considering today. This proposal does not change that. So you can speculate about what might happen or what you want to impose on this proposal, but that's just not what's before us. There are real cost savings to be had, and I think it's an extraordinarily important, self-sacrificing first step for us as legislators to say, we're willing to put our jobs on the line because we understand how serious the budget problems are in this county, and while doing this would only correct 1% of our structural budget deficit, all we need are 100 proposals of $500,000 savings, and we'll be out of the woods. And that's exactly what this is intended to do. So yes, to answer your question, through you, Mr. Chairman, I find it very interesting that these counties have decided on their own accord in their own local communities to decide to spend so much on their county legislatures. And in many cases, they have a much, much greater tax base to do that. But that's not what this proposal is about here in Monroe County.
I would like to say that I see that we disagree on whether the cost will go down or up by reducing the legislators. But I would like to go on and say, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Direct it through the chair, please.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the referral put before us today represents a reduction in representation for our constituents. It is not a reduction in the cost of government. Our research has shown that it will increase the cost of government dramatically. In considering this referral, however, we also have to consider how democracy, with a small d, will be affected in Monroe County. Currently, with the 29 elected seats, it is much easier for someone interested in serving in the county legislature to be nominated in his district and to raise the money to run for office. With only 15 legislative seats, it would be twice as hard to secure a nomination and cost twice as much to get elected, thereby effectively eliminating a large majority of those who might wish to serve. This would encourage the establishment of full-time rather than part-time legislators. The combination of fewer legislators and having full-time legislators would make it easier for one person or a small group of people to exert control over the legislature, taking political power, representation, away from our citizens where it's supposed to be. In addition, increasing each legislator's district from 25,000 to 50,000 constituents will reduce citizens' access to their county legislators. Citizens would have to travel farther to meet with their legislator, wait longer to talk with them, and perhaps not receive the same time and attention that they have in the past. In closing, having 29 members also brings a very we could use some water here is what we could use. I'll go on. In closing, having 29 members also brings a very diverse group of backgrounds and experiences to this legislature. Farmers, healthcare professionals, teachers, small business owners, lawyers, firefighters, parents, and grandparents all bring their unique perspectives to this legislature. Mr. Chairman, reducing the opportunity for citizen participation and reducing the amount of diversity in our county legislature, along with increasing costs, is not the direction that this chamber should want to go.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Legislator Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to respond again to my colleague, Mr. Holland. Through you, I agree. This is most definitely a reduction in representation. While I disagree with your previous assertion that this is not a reduction in spending, it is, and this would not create full-time legislators. It does not. This would enlarge the districts represented by county legislators. And I respect your opinion that that is too large to adequately represent. I'm open to suggestions if there is a different size legislature that you would like to see. I think it's important to have a reduction, but 15 is not a magical number, just like 29 is not a magical number. If there's some compromise in between that you feel would better serve, but also show the taxpayers the cost savings that we need to show to fix this county's budget, I'm willing to consider it. But more importantly, I think, well, I certainly disagree that in this day and age, with all of the levels of government that New York State has, local, town, village, local, county, state, and federal, that a district that represents 50,000 people, approximately the size of Irondequoit, is not unwieldy, is not something that's going to result in burdensome waits for constituents to find their legislator, especially this day and age with the plethora of abilities and ways for constituents to reach their representatives, and vice versa, for the representatives to communicate with their constituents. So I respectfully disagree with you on that point. But I do think that the cost savings and the sacrifice this would show outweigh that, given all of the other layers of government that exist in this state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Legislator Barker.
I just would like to add that I know my brother-in-law is a Democratic committeeman in Erie County, and when they reduced the size of the Erie County legislature, they didn't anticipate full-time legislators, but that's what they ended up with. I think what Mr. Holland's trying to say is that we take this first step, that's what's going to happen. And I would argue with Mr. Esposito's assertion, Perrington is the same size as Irondequoit, or roughly the same size. We're not quite as big as Irondequoit. But it would be difficult for myself as a teacher and with a family to be able to give the same quality of service that I can give my district that I do now. And frankly, what happened in Erie County is what would happen here. And I know that, and I have no doubt that Mr. Esposito would do a great job representing all of Irondequoit on his own. But frankly, the diversity that Mr. Holland talked about is one of the things that makes this legislature special. If you look at Mr. Esposito's background, he has the time. He's a full-time politician. The rest of us, be it if we have a job and children, when you double the amount of the size of the district, not only do you double the constituent service, but my point, as I talked to Mr. Esposito about earlier, when we talked about it, is that I'm not just looking, well, I'm frankly looking at the representation to the voters. The way the districts are now, you can put forth effort, and if you start in June, you can hit every door between June and Election Day. You can go out there and hand out your literature. You can get a couple $100 and make a key card and go out and ask people to vote for you. If you double the size of the legislature, you're not going to be able to do that. You are not going to be able to hit every door. It would be physically impossible. I found it almost impossible to get to every door in my district now, and I don't get to every door. Now, I know Mr. Holland and Mr. Eckel do, and I admire their tenacity when they get out there and get there. I haven't been able to do that yet with a family and with the job being here and the other full-time job. And I'm just afraid that if we double the size of the districts, we take a huge pool of people out of the ability to run for these offices. And frankly, the biggest fear that I have is if we double the size of the districts, that takes away the chance for any challengers to go out, walk a district. It just puts more power in the hands of the political machines that pick the candidates, and it puts more power in the special interests that fund the candidates. Right now, as a legislator, we can go out there with our key card and we can knock on every door. You have to double the size of the legislature. You can't do that. You double the size of the district, it all comes down to those pretty little stupid postcards that we send out. And frankly, that's not the type of representation I think the people of Monroe County deserve. I think the people of Monroe County deserve representation where their legislator, if he wants it or she wants it bad enough, can get to every single door. And by doubling the size of the district, that's impossible. And frankly, where we are, if we even were to compromise at 27 or 25 legislators, I believe we'd have the same problem, the same issue, that we wouldn't be able to give that door-to-door campaigning that we can. Now, I came through the village ranks, where it's important to get to every door. That's where I started. But I then went townwide. I have represented 46,000 people, and there's a difference. There's a difference. You can't get to every door, and I just object. If this body is going to exist, and that could be the debate that we have, should this body exist? Or should we have a board of supervisors? Frankly, at this point, the debate would be disingenuous to the supervisors because of the fiscal situation that Mr. Esposito so eloquently talks about. But if that should be the discussion, should this board exist at all? Or should this legislative body? And frankly, turning it over to a board of supervisors now would be a cop-out, even though, as anyone that's talked to me at the time I've been here, I've been inclined to favor that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Legislator Eckel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair, I'd just like to start out by saying my access to myself for my constituents is greater than it ever has been before. My constituents don't travel any farther because they still can get to their phone, they can still get to their email, and they can still send a letter. I'm always available and happy to talk to people. If I can't get to them, we'll find a way to talk. My mailbox is always there. I always look at my mail and answer the letters. I answer the phone calls that I get, my home phone number. My cell phone number is on my card. People call me directly, and I get calls any time of the night. Thankfully, not every night, but I do get calls. I just want to say that my representation is not just the time I'm out knocking on doors trying to get elected. My representation is there day by day by day, and I'm always available day by day by day. I work full-time. When I work full-time, I don't have a full-time job at this point, but I'm a full-time student at this point, and I do this job. I have a family with 2 kids. I have all of the same considerations that all of us do, but we still make time for me to represent my constituents as they need me. I'm happy to talk at any time. This isn't about being elected. This is about serving. And I've always firmly believed that in this country, if somebody wants to serve, they can serve. Sometimes it takes more grit and elbow grease and boot polish than money, but it can be done. Next, I'd just like to mention, we talk a lot about mandated spending. Mandated spending. We must talk to Albany about mandated spending. This is mandated spending, an unfunded mandate at that. We have to have a legislature. That's what we were created for. But we can cut that money by $500,000. Yeah, it'll be a little bit more work for us. And no one's ever asked for any more compensation. I don't want more compensation. I don't need more compensation. I do this because I want to serve. Let's cut some mandated spending. We have the ability and the chance to do it right now. Better yet, let's not us do it. Let's let the voters decide. Let's let the voters decide. We need to cut some mandated spending. We have that chance to say to Albany, we're cutting a little bit of your mandated spending right here, right now. I urge you, my colleagues, I urge you to at least give the voters the chance to say yes or no to this. At least give them a chance to have a public hearing that will allow them to come to us and say, yes, we like this, or no, we do not like this. We've talked and talked between ourselves in the media, here in the chambers, on the telephone, meetings, etc. But we should give the people of Monroe County a chance to say, do we want to save $500,000 a year, or do we want the representation we have? Do we need the representation we have, or do we need that $500,000? Thank you.
Legislator Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a good discussion. I'd like to make what I hope will be a final comment. I would like to thank you and thank my colleagues for sharing what I truly believe are genuine and honest opinions and legitimate concerns about the size of this body. We obviously disagree. I think my colleague, Mr. Eckel, and I believe that the size of districts that this would result in are able to be represented well, and it doesn't sound like you believe that is the case. To that point, and to the point Mr. Eckel just made, I would ask the 5 of us not to be the final arbiters of this proposal. I think that people should have the opportunity to decide the size and structure of the government that they have. We may be talking about our jobs, but we're talking about the voters and the taxpayers' government. And if we end this discussion and this proposal here today, they won't have an opportunity to weigh in formally at a public hearing or in November's general election. So I would encourage you to put your faith in the voters and move this proposal out of this committee today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this discussion and the opportunity to address it.
Are there any other further comments? Legislator Howland.
Mr. Chairman, I think we do have a couple disagreements that are very strong between us, that being whether it will save money or cost our taxpayers money to reduce the legislature. I do have one suggestion that might tell us how it would go. We could perhaps run a smaller experiment in the city. If reducing the number of county legislators so each one represents 50,000 people is such a stellar idea, and in doing so will save so much money, I have to ask why the Rochester City Council is not entertaining the same idea. From everything I have heard and read, it is likely that the city population will drop below 200,000 people with this year's census. Going by the reasoning of the referral that's been presented here tonight, would this not be the opportune time for the City Council to reduce the number of council members from 9 to 5? This would leave each council member representing about 40,000 people, and if they reduce their salary of $32,000 per year to the $18,000 per year that the county legislators are paid, the city would save at least $250,000 per year. Mr. Chairman, I suggest the City Council should implement this suggestion first, and if it works well for them, we could then consider this proposal for our body.
Legislator Esposito.
Thank you. I apologize. I had hoped my previous comment would be able to be the last, since I thought we had a reasonably productive conversation. This is sort of my main problem with the opposition to this. I'm disappointed that my colleague, Mr. Howland, would raise another legislative body. We're not in the City Council. It's a fair question to ask the City Council. You should do so. We're talking about the county legislature and the county budget. It is important for us to be taken seriously by taxpayers who've lost significant confidence in legislative and government officials at all levels, to restore that by acting in a self-sacrificing manner and stop pointing fingers other places, whether it's Albany, whether it's Washington, whether it's the city. That is not what people want to hear. It's not what I hope to hear tonight. I hope we can focus on the fact that this county has problems that we can control and we can address. And this is a proposal for the county legislature, not the City Council, not any other legislative body. It is specifically intended to talk about our own ranks so that we can do that first before we deal with all of the other structural problems in our county's budget and every other department that's within our purview. So I'm disappointed that that would come up at this time. I'm sorry to address it in this manner, but I want to make sure people understand that it's time for all of us to look inward and look realistically at the financial storm that's out there, the economic difficulties are out there, and this enormous structural budget deficit that we're facing, and we have not substantively addressed in years. It's only increased. So rhetoric about other places and pointing fingers does not help. We need to address serious proposals like this one and talk about cost savings in the county budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Legislator Barker.
And I just want to reiterate that I believe that this proposal would eliminate citizen legislators. I think that it would be the first step towards a full-time legislature, as we've seen with our sister counties that have gone the same route. So I'm going to vote no. And I'd ask for a roll call, please.
Is there any other discussion? A roll call vote, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Barker? No. Mr. Eckel? Yes. Mr. Esposito? Yes. Mr. Howland? No. Chairman Yolovich?
No. Motion fails. Is there any other business to come before this committee? Hearing none, the March 22nd, 2010 meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee stands adjourned. The next meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee is scheduled for Monday, April 26th at 5:30 p.m.